change only one thing in your world.
Hmm.
If you're going to write science fiction, fine. Write science fiction, write future, write whatever you want. Only ever change one thing. Have your world develop out of that one thing. Like it's New York City, but it's New York City if goblins were real. You can spin out a fantastic story from something like that. A lot of, I think, the best stories are fundamentally true, fundamentally real, fundamentally correct, but there's just this one thing that's different. Who was it? Was it Ridley Scott when he did Blade Runner? He said the future is like the present, only more so. Ho, 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 ho.
Welcome to Storycomic Presents, where we interview amazing storytellers and artists. This is episode 461. I'm your host, Barney Smith of Storycomic.com, and we're excited to have with us the internationally acclaimed and celebrated New England author, William Price Jr. Bill.
Sorry, do you have the right William Price Jr.?
I mean,
I actually, I did
if
a
this is the
show.
one, yeah.
I did a show about 2 weeks ago, out in Maine, and it was just another, no big deal. And I was chatting through the day away, and at some point in the afternoon, I noticed this couple in the background that were just standing around waiting. And there was a calm point where there's no one around, and they finally came forward. And the woman asked me she could have she could have my autograph. I was like, all right, sure. And she handed me an empty paper bag. I was like, what? She said, oh, well, she was pregnant. It was their first kid. They were just getting started. They had no money. And she explained that, yeah, we drove for like an hour to come see you. And I was like, why? Have you met me? I'm not worth driving 10 minutes. But I said, all right. So I actually signed one of my newest books and gave it to him because I felt bad. It's like, Jesus, you wasted a tank of gas to come for this?
But yeah, I mean, this is William Price Jr. here. See, I mean, you came out with you have two book series right now. You've got the Master of Fate book and the Fallen Angel book.
Hey, you want a little insider information for you and your fans?
Sure.
Fallen Angel was supposed to be a placeholder.
Really?
Yeah, it was literally just, and that happens when you write, you come up with a new character and you kind of put brackets around it, like, all right, I'll call him Bob until I come up with a good name for this character. And as I was putting together Fallen Love, I was like, all right, I'm gonna give the series a name. I'll just call it Fallen Angel for right now. And then I completely forgot about it. I put everything together. I hired my cover artist. I sent all the information, and I actually got my first physical copy. I looked at it, and oh, damn it! But by then, I was kind of stuck.
And it's so talk to us a little bit about since we're talking about the Fallen Angel series, talk to us a little bit about that series.
Um, Fallen, Fallen Love especially, but the whole series in general. I was in the army, and I deployed to two different wars. I was medically retired. When I got out of the service, I was struggling. I was having a lot of problems.
Hmm.
I was in and out of counseling for a long time, and I knew I wanted to write about it. I wanted to share because that's a lot of what writing is. It's just kind of sharing your pain, sharing your experiences. And I always knew I wanted to tell a story about that kind of darkness, about what I went through without doing the actual play by play. Like, oh, here's what happened on day 3 when this, firefight happened. I didn't want to do that. Instead, I wanted to concentrate more on the feelings of it, the emotions of it.
Hmm.
So the main character came at, I was actually, I was sitting in Christmas Eve services with my mom and my little sister one year. And we were in the pews. We were just waiting around for the service to get started. And by the way, this was back before smartphones, so you had to find your entertainment in the world. At one point, I picked up a Bible and I just flipped to a random page and I started reading, and it was the story about when the Babylonians laid siege to Jerusalem, and the angel of the Lord devastated the army. And I just sat there and I was thinking about that for a minute, like, okay, wait. So there was an angel whose only job was to be God's wrath. That the only time this angel interacted with humanity at all was in a really horrific way, the worst possible way. Now, what would that do to you? Because I mean, I
Mm.
was only at war for 10 years. This angel would have been experiencing these things for centuries, millennia. And the idea started developing out of there. I came up with this main character who his backstory isn't that he's a veteran, that he was warrior, he went fought. Instead, just that he had to do all these horrific things in the name of righteousness. And he finally reached a tipping point. That's where the series starts. Is he's turned his back on all of it. He just cannot deal with it anymore. The Fallen Angel series as a whole, the 9 books I have planned. And by the way, I'm shamelessly ripping off the Divine Comedy, Dante for my structure. The 9 books that I have planned will follow themselves, will pattern themselves after my own recovery from the trauma of war.
Mm.
But it'll be with like demons and cults and
Okay.
fun stuff instead of the horrors of war.
And so how does this, is it in the same quote unquote universe as your um as your Masters of Fate series?
Oh no, 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 no. In fact, the Master of Fate is a pretty traditional high fantasy story.
Okay.
I studied Tolkien's like all of his work, all of his writings, all of his lectures that exist, and kind of treated them as the roadmap for creating my own fantasy world. Master of Fate came
Okay.
out of I just absolutely love fantasy. Fantasy was the very first novel I ever read when I was 10. My mom got for me. It was Pawn of Prophecy by David Eddings.
Yeah.
And I inhaled that book, dove into the rest of that series, and I've never left fantasy behind. I absolutely adore the fantasy genre.
Okay.
So Master of
Um,
Fate is my attempt to make some small contribution to the genre.
so did, as you mentioned before, so did living through conflict and rescue missions influence your vision of what fantastical heroism is?
Oh God, yes. God,
Okay.
yes. Every I a problem that I often have with some writers is how kind of generic their characters are. Um, how every character kind of talks the same, every character behaves the same, they have the same sort of code of ethics. Uh, and in my experience, that's just not how people are. There's a great variety to it. And my own experiences overseas is that you can have braggarts, you can have quiet people, and it has almost no correlation to how they behave in a crisis situation.
So Bill, talk to us about the dialogue aspects of your writing.
And I occasionally talk to my writing students about this. I mentioned earlier how I always struggle a bit when I'm reading a book and all the characters sound the same. So I'm always looking for those little dialogue markers of wait, who just said this?
Mm.
So when I'm writing dialogue, I'm always very, very conscious of that. Like I'll write the dialogue out. I'll write the sequence back and forth, whatever happens. But as part of the rewrite, part of the editing process is I go back in and I highlight, all right, this person said this, this, and this, and I change the grammar of their dialogue. For example, the main character, the POV character in Master of Fate, Thomas, he is exceptionally well educated. He's exceptionally well read, but he doesn't have worldly experience. So his dialogue, his sentences are grammatically correct. He in that formal English kind of way. Like he doesn't
Mm.
end on a preposition. He knows how to use subordinate clauses, that sort of thing. Whereas another character has learned English basically as a second language. So, but he's highly intelligent. So the things he says are correct and deep thought, but they're very grammatically incorrect. They're very grammatically inconsistent. Just like a person who a non-native English speaker presents themselves
Mm.
in Fallen Angel. I'm trying. I don't know how good I'm doing because the story's set in a fictional town in Central Texas, so I'm trying to use dialect, not in the over the top Garth Ennis kind of way, but just little like one of the characters, a bartender. she's native born Texan and she's from San Antone. And I've noticed over the years that people from there tend not to use terminal G's. So that's the thing I did for her. Anytime she has a dialogue, if she has a word that ends in G, I drop the G. Just as a way, so that I don't have to say blah, 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 Candace said, blah, 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 Candace said, to keep reminding you who's talking, but rather, hopefully, encouraging the reader to understand that character is the one saying these things. It feels a little more organic,
Mm.
hopefully.
Where does the title Into the Northlands come from?
That came from the fact that my first book was too damn long and I needed to break it off into another book. I mean, honestly, I can give you the artsy like, oh well, my muse spoke to me. No, the fact was book one was just too damn long. And I was looking at at the draft, and I was like, wait a minute, like if you look at it, it's Into the Northlands, the Northern Keep, the Western Empire, the Eastern War. The last one's going to be the Southern Invasions. You see the very obvious pattern, right? And yet, book one is Into the Northlands and then the Northern Keep.
Okay.
Um, I I'm always really conscious of plot structure, story length. I try really hard to cut out there's any number of times when I've written a scene and I've fallen in love with it and just thought, okay, this is the greatest thing ever. But during the editing process said it doesn't do anything. It doesn't advance the plot. There's no character development here that isn't found somewhere else. It's got to go.
Mm.
And when I finished the first draft of the first book, which at the time was the Northern Keep, I realized there was this big chunk in the front of how Thomas leaves home, how he first, encounters Rogan Eigenhard, how he first gets to the Northern Keep. And the actual honest to God story doesn't start until he actually gets to the Northern Keep.
Wow.
It's Into the Northlands is almost a prequel.
Right.
Almost. I wrestled it for a long time about, do I just cut it all? Do I just start him here and fill in the backstory as I go? But I thought, well, it's short. It's a nice kind of easy. It's not like have you read Dune? Frank Herbert's
That's a
Dune?
huge book.
And it's really kind of intimidating to new readers. Like, wait, I got to wrestle this monster before I get to. And I want to do kind of the opposite, saying, all right, if you're just thinking about trying the series, if you're just thinking about you're not sure, Into the Northlands is a good shallow end kind of easing into it.
Talked about it. So this is a high fantasy. Talk to us a little bit about the magic system that you created.
Um, well, the magic system is tied directly to how I built my fantasy races. I don't like it when magic is effortless, when
Mm.
it's just a gimmick, when you can wave your hand and I don't like magic that is late series Harry Potter magic, where it really doesn't look like any schmuck can do this. I like magic that looks like episode 4 Star Wars, or even better, episode 5 Empire Strikes Back. If you go back and you look at the scenes of Luke learning to use the Force, that looks rough.
Mm.
Like, I look at that, okay, there's a reason my fat ass ain't becoming a Jedi. Because I'm not about running around a swamp with some little guy on my back trying to do flips. But there's that wonderful scene when Luke Skywalker is like, he's balancing, he's trying to balance the rocks, he's on his doing headstand, and you can see Mark Hamill did a great job. You can see the effort it's taking, and when he's distracted, he loses it. And then he
Mm.
tries to lift up the ship and fails, and he's there panting and gasping. That's what I want magic to look like. That there's a reason not many people do it.
Mm.
So in Into the Northlands, Thomas is essentially a medieval Catholic. So for him, magic equals witchcraft. In his brain, that's how it works. The reason for that is because in this world, there was a great empire 1,000 years ago that was tyrannical at its end, that enslaved people. The humans were little more than cattle, and their entire power base was magic. They were good at it. They were powerful at it because they lived for 1,000 years, so they had time to learn it. But that created this what's the word I'm looking for? This sort of resistance to magic. Once that empire fell, humans took over. Humans are looking at it saying, okay, anybody who has magic is culturally linked to this horrid empire and therefore is untrustworthy. In Into the Northlands, in the first quarter of the book, Thomas meets, they're called the Sylvi, one of these practitioners. And almost the first thing he says to her is, "Are you a witch?" His arc through the series is facing his preconceptions, his prejudices, the things he was raised to believe. And he meets this person who he's like, "Look, you walk like a witch, you talk like a witch, you must be a witch."
Mm.
And learning to overcome that. The magic system is very much grounded in medieval paganism, in naturalism, summoning spirits, communing with nature. It gets flashy at times, but there's always a huge consequence. The magic user that he meets, she doesn't really do much. Not big flashy until one scene when they're about to get swamped by a mob, and then she kind of lets loose and it lasts for all of about 30 seconds because after that she collapses in exhaustion. She just can't maintain it.
Huh. Well, hey there. If you're enjoying our podcast, don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform. Your support means the world to us and helps us keep this show going. We love hearing from you, so any feedback is welcome. And thank you for being a part of our podcast family and for all your support. It truly means a lot to us. And so you mentioned different species and races. What are some of the races that are kind of unique to
Humans
your
are
world?
medieval Catholics. They
Okay.
have an Inquisition. They have a central church. They call it the Holy Mother Church. They have a College of Cardinals. They don't have a Pope figure because he just died. Um, and their belief system, the closest they get to magic, is their faith in this institution rather than in any one deity. The other two major races that I create, I didn't want to just be another Tolkien ripoff. I didn't want
Mm.
to just do elves, dwarves, orcs. So instead, I created the two major races are the Sylvi and the Uldra. The Sylvi are, if you look at the covers to the third and fourth books, you can see there's actually two humans in the middle, a Sylvi on one side, and an Uldra on the other. The Sylvi are a head shorter than humans. They're extremely long-lived. They live for 1,000 years. They lived so long that when they had this empire, they convinced humans they were gods because they had all this magic and they lived so very long. The Sylvi are matriarchal because only their women have magic. The men are just kind of like they're there for sex appeal. The women are very authoritative. They're also kind of sexist because in their society only the women have any ability to accomplish anything because their technology is entirely based on magic. Now,
Mm.
to contrast them, I created the Uldra. The Uldra are Jewish Vikings.
Huh.
If you really look into history, the ancient Hebrews, the pre-Israel Hebrews, they have a lot in common with what we think of as Vikings. They
Okay.
tend to be nomadic. They do settle, but they kind of like raiding. Very strong family system. Um, uh, uh, a a they do have a governmental system, but it is almost secondary to family and clan. Plus, I don't know why, but the idea of a Jewish Viking just really they're monotheistic. They live near the tallest mountain in the world, which they call the Allfather's throne.
Huh.
And in the Uldra mind, it's like, how can you question if there's a god? There's the mountain right there. Are you an idiot? I remember years ago, um, I went on a study abroad to the Temple of Poseidon outside of Athens. And if you ever get the chance to see it, I encourage it. It's wonderful. It's a nice, well preserved temple, but it's right at the edge of this cliff. And I was chatting with a classics professor while we were there, and he said, "Yeah, this really gives you an insight into the ancient mind of their gods." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, Poseidon wasn't the god of the sea, he was the sea. A Greek would stand here, would look out and say, 'Well, there's Poseidon right there. You see the waves? Kind of idiot are you? How do you not understand this? Look at the water. That's Poseidon." And that kind of blunt practicality formed the Uldra in my mind. For them, Barat, the older character, there's a scene in the second book when somebody asks him, "Hey, can you hold this package for me?" And he says, "Okay." So he hangs on to it. The next day, Thomas runs into him, and Barat is still holding that package. It's like, "Hey, what are you doing?" He's like, "Well, somebody asked me to hold this. You you've been holding it this entire day. Nobody told me to put it down." It's just that kind of easy to look at as simplicity, but is in fact just practicality in their mind.
Hmm.
Practicality dominates their entire structure. They had at one point a priesthood, just like the Hebrews had a priesthood, that were wiped out. The Uldra were enslaved by that Sylvi Empire, and they were used for slave labor, gladiatorial fights, soldiers. And then there was an uprising that shattered the world, and the Uldra lost all their priests, all their access to magic. So now the Uldra are experimenting with things like steam engines and explosives and
Huh.
chemicals. And so they make a really, I think, good binary opposition against the overly magical Sylvi. You have this very overt tension, which really comes to a head in the Eastern War, of magic versus technology and which one's going to win out.
Um, so, which fantasy tropes did you really have fun just upending?
Which fantasy tropes did I? The Noble Knight. The Noble Knight was one of my favorite ones. There is a knight in a main character, Rogan Eigenhard, and I at every single turn, man, I this guy look. I mean, I almost make him look like a putz. He tries really, really hard to do the right thing, to be honorable. Um, the thing is, like, for him, honor can't get in the way of winning. Like, if he's in a fight and his opponent loses his sword, Rogan's not going to drop his sword and fight honorably. Rogan's going to stab the guy in the nuts, and then he's going to lie about it later about how honorably he fought, because it's like, I'm not going to that guy. Will kill me. Plus his horse Stick. Stick is very much the comic relief of this series. Rogan the Knight hates attention. He hates being the center of focus. He's very self-conscious. In fact, I did a little grammatical trick with his dialogue. Rogan never begins a sentence with a first-person singular pronoun. He never begins with I, me, my, as the sort of insight into his thinking of he has a lot of trouble expressing himself like that. He thinks of others before himself because he has a bit of a self-consciousness problem. Stick, on
Hmm.
the other hand, loves being the center of attention. So Stick will start prancing around, do great things. Rogan will be like, "Hey, we got to go do this thing," but Stick's getting. There's an actual scene where Rogan has to go and meet with someone to get some information, but Stick is playing with some local children, and he doesn't want to leave. Rogan grabs the horse, forces him away, and tries to mount him, and Stick bucks him. That it's I don't quite go Disney levels of like self-awareness, but Stick, anybody who's spent any amount of time with a horse knows they have personalities. And if a horse doesn't want to go somewhere, the horse ain't going nowhere.
So, what's the age range for your series?
Um, I always hate answering that question because it's so variable. I
Hmm.
read my first fantasy book when I was 10 or 11. I
Yeah.
didn't get half of what was going on, I don't think. I went back and reread the series in my 20s and was just amazed. Well, it's just like with movies. You know, you see something as a kid, and then years later you see it as an adult, and you get so much more of the context. Um, I try really hard. Well, for example, in the second book, in the Northern Keep, there is a love scene. In fact, the major arc of the Northern Keep is Thomas meets a girl and has his first kind of adult relationship. And sorry, spoilers. It culminates in a sex scene, a love scene towards the end of the book. The way I write the sex scene, in a lot of ways, is how I write violence as well. Excuse me. When I write that sex scene, I'm focused on the emotion of the moment. It's love, just like hate, just like envy, just like any other emotion, it needs to be an arc for a character,
Hmm.
or two characters. So this love scene is focused more on what are they feeling, what are they experiencing in that moment, how is it growing together? How is it changing from two people into one blended identity? The minute that scene is going to change into an anatomy lesson, all right, it's the next day.
Mm.
Because my thinking is kind of, look, we all understand the mechanics of lovemaking, and if you don't understand the mechanics, you don't need to be reading it from this guy. But I do that a lot with my violence too. Is even in there's one scene towards the beginning. I don't know why I have the Northern Keep on my head so much. There's a scene at the very beginning of the Northern Keep when Rogan and Thomas they actually fight this creature that I call a Lamashti, which was huge contact backstory. Basically, they're disembodied spirits that can only attack you under very specific circumstances. So Rogan and Thomas are attacked by these things. The problem is they're virtually incorporeal. So, like you swing a sword at it, and it just passes through them. They have absolutely no effect on it.
Mm.
However, in this world, the Uldra, the Jewish Vikings, they've learned how to. They call it the All Father's blessing. They can harden metal against magic. They can make
Okay.
it completely impervious to magic. Rogan's shield has been hardened. So even though both of them have these swords, they have weapons, they have armor, they have everything, they can't affect the Lamashti at all. The only they can do is hide behind Rogan's shield. And what I'm doing in that scene is instead of talking about, oh, and the claws come down and there's blood and the screaming, I'm focused more on the terror of being attacked by this nearly invisible force.
Mm.
And how would that feel to you? When you're out in the woods in the middle of the night and you can't see the thing, you're going to be infinitely more afraid of it. So whether
Right.
it's action, whether it's romance, whatever it is, I'm focused more on what are you feeling? How does it hit you emotionally, psychologically, rather than, oh, look, a penis.
Mm.
So in terms of age range, it's
Right.
hard. It's hard.
Right. Um, what advice would you give someone that wants to start writing high fantasy?
Oh God, don't. Just write something easy. Write like nuclear physics. Writing bad fantasy is easy. You can just make the shit up as you go, and it doesn't matter. Twilight. um, if you want to write good fantasy, consistent fantasy, um, I always told writing students any speculative fiction, whether it's fantasy, science fiction, anything, change only one thing in your world.
Mm.
If you're going to write science fiction, fine. Write science fiction, write future, write whatever you want. Only ever change one thing. Have your world develop out of that one thing. Like it's New York City, but it's New York City if goblins were real. You can spin out a fantastic story from something like that. A lot of, I think, the best stories are fundamentally true, fundamentally real, fundamentally correct, but there's just this one thing that's different. Who was it? Was it Ridley Scott when he did Blade Runner? He said the future is like the present, only more so. It's very so writing fantasy, in order to write fantasy, in order to create my fantasy world, I had to do a deep dive into, okay, what period is this going to be? It's medieval, okay. Well, everybody writes medieval, so good luck with that. What medieval is actually kind of a broad net because medieval Western Europe is very different from medieval Japan. And it's
Mm.
very different from medieval Italy, from medieval Africa. And in the next 5 book sequence of Master of Fate, in the first 5 books, they're only on one continent. After that, they're going to start moving globally because I want to introduce the world slowly. I started doing research for Master of Fate back in 2001. I didn't feel ready to start writing it until 2020
Wow.
because all of the fact checking and the research. What's the difference between a long sword and a broadsword? What's the difference between chainmail and scale mail? Who used chainmail? Who used scale mail? What kind of clothes did people wear in 17th century Spain? In order to have a world that feels realistic, you need to look at what actually happened. Or
Mm.
you can just make the shit up as you go. Twilight.
Right.
I kind of bag on Twilight because I had a classics professor. There's only two Roman novels that have survived. One is really good, one is really terrible. The really terrible one is called the Satyricon. And I had to read that damn book every semester of the 2 years I was getting my degree in classical studies. And I had a Roman studies professor who just said, "Oh, this is the greatest piece of literature ever written." It was dog shit. It was terrible, I think. And I kept flashing to this idea. I don't know how it started, but in 2000 years, the only book that's going to survive is Twilight. And in 2000 years, students are going to be forced to read that thing. And their professor going to be like, "Oh, look at this great civilization and all that we've learned and how they viewed the world." I was like, "No, it's trash. It's just garbage. It's just luck of the draw that it survived." Yeah, that's my rant on Twilight.
Yeah. If people want to learn more about you and your work, where's the best place they could go to?
I maintain a website, wintersteelwords.wordpress.com. I have short stories in a whole bunch of genres. I also
Mm.
offer sample chapters from my books. I did a little bio, and I am thoroughly smartass in the bio because I'm a smartass person. But everything I am, everything I will ever be, I put it in a story and I put it on that website.
Bill, you're gonna have to come back on when you get your fifth book out. Then.
Oh, God help me. I'm in the middle of writing it right now. If you want actually a sneak, you see the whiteboard there?
Yeah.
That's one of my working outlines. I'm working on book 3 of Fallen Angel called Fallen Honor. I'm almost done with the draft now. It's supposed to be out around Halloween.
All right, Bill. This was a genuine pleasure. I had a great time chatting.
That wears off quickly.
Yeah.